Our next several sessions are going to cover wireless networking and how to hack it. And this is important from a hacker perspective because wireless networks are so common, so pervasive in the world. We're doing much more wireless networking than we are almost wired networking, to be honest with you. Everything is wireless. Mobile devices are so ubiquitous in our society and in the enterprise. We're using wireless devices to do our daily work, to transfer all of our data, and we're doing it on small devices that we carry in our pockets in addition to laptops and computers. So obviously there's a big market out there for hackers to attack wireless networks. It's a data-rich environment and a security-poor environment in a lot of cases. Wireless is so pervasive, as I said, that everybody sends data over wireless networks, and a lot of them are unprotected. They have very little or no encryption and very little protection over the data itself, especially on mobile devices. Wireless devices can offer an attacker a backdoor into a wired network. And in fact, wireless hacking is sometimes used to bypass devices that normally we see on big wired networks. People focus on putting firewalls, IDSs, border routers, and so forth on a wired network, but sometimes they leave the wireless portion unsecured. They set up a wireless access point, and maybe they lock it down a little bit with WEP or WPA, but they don't go through the depth of putting a firewall up or an authentication server up and so forth. And I'm not talking about home networks, obviously. I'm talking about enterprise-level networks. And in home networks, people often use wireless with no encryption or with weak encryption, and as long as you can get the key, you can get into their wireless network and steal their data. So you're looking at identity theft, credit card theft, credential theft, personal data, and so forth. Now, wireless attacks include attacks on the protocols themselves, such as WEP and WPA. It also can involve setting up rogue access points that persuade people to connect to them. And there's also, of course, a wireless denial of service, and we'll look at actually how to do that a little bit later when we run the AirQuack suite of tools and actually deauthenticate a client and an AP. Now, wireless attacks, as I said, are often used to gain a foothold into an otherwise protected wired network. It may or may not have firewalls, IDSs, and so forth in place on the wireless side. So what are the goals of wireless hacking? Well, sniffing unencrypted transmissions if they're not encrypting anything. If they're just wide open, obviously we can get whatever we want just by sniffing. But if they are encrypting traffic, then obviously we want to get the encryption keys so that we can decrypt that traffic. We want to be able to authenticate to the access point so we can join the wireless network and then go further in our hacking process. We also may want to intercept data once we break into the wireless network and, of course, enter the wired networks, as I said. Now, some considerations for wireless attacks, and the protocols are the big ones, really. WEP is a weak security protocol that came about several years ago when 802.11b came out, and it's weak because it uses a small, meaning 24-bit initialization vector, and these vectors repeat every million or so packets, so if you get enough packets, you're eventually going to get the IV, and that can be used to crack the WEP key. In addition to that, WEP uses a poor implementation of RC4, the streaming protocol, and while RC4 by itself is not bad, WEP's implementation of it is not very good. So we have a stronger protocol out there, WPA and WPA2, and it's much better in terms of wireless security because it uses more advanced protocols, TKIP and AES, to encrypt keys and to periodically change the keys out. The problem with WPA and WPA2 is it relies on the strength of the key itself, how complex the key is and how long it is. And as we'll see when we crack WPA here in a few moments, that is really the big weakness of WPA and WPA2 is a weak key. Now in the enterprise, we don't just type in pre-shared keys like we do in WPA and WPA2. We use WPA, WPA2 enterprise level authentication, and this basically uses 802.1x authentication methods, which can use EAP. It can also use smart cards, tokens, and so forth. And this provides for mutual authentication, not only the host to the access point, but also the user as well. So it does give you the ability to have user-level authentication. In other words, they can't join the wireless network until they authenticate themselves to the domain, possibly. 802.1x also offers connection security. Again, this mutual authentication, the encryption of the keys, and so forth. And you can actually have port-based security in a wireless network using 802.1x. But you have to use WPA and WPA2 Enterprise in order to do that. Now, some wireless vulnerabilities that we see that a lot of hackers take advantage of include unencrypted traffic. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. That's just out there for everybody to sniff. Using open key WEP, in other words, making it so anyone can connect to the wireless network. Using shared WEP. WEP keys are not very strong as well. Using simple passwords in WPA and WPA2, as I mentioned, and we'll see an example of that later. Non-mutual authentication between the client and the AAP. A lot of times there doesn't have to be authentication. And again, I mentioned open WEP again. Common SSIDs. Not changing them so you have common SSIDs like Linksys or Netgear, and you have 5 of them in your neighborhood. You might not know which one to join as a client, so you join the one that doesn't require encryption, and you've joined the wrong one. No protection between the wireless and wired networks, just allowing on the enterprise side for people to come into the wireless network and go ahead and join with no further authentication the wired network. And obviously we have a lot of attacks that wireless uses. Wireless attackers use sniffing, rogue access points where they set up a bogus access point to get unsuspecting users to connect to it, evil twins where you duplicate a legitimate access point and get unsuspecting users to connect, and then of course war driving, war chalking, and war walking where you basically scope out wireless networks, and then of course wireless denial of service attacks. So we'll look at some of these when we go into the next couple of sessions and demonstrate WPA cracking, for example.